What if the story you were taught about God was written by the side that won, not the side that was right? Sit with that for a second, because somewhere in the deserts of Egypt, buried in a sealed clay jar for over 1600 years, there was a different answer, a forbidden one, written by people who believe the world you're living in right now isn't quite what it claims to be. People who believe there's a spark inside you that doesn't belong here. People who were hunted and silenced so thoroughly that for centuries, we only knew about them through the words of the men who destroyed them. They were called the Gnostics. By the end of this video, you're going to understand something most people never get close to, not because it's complicated, but because almost nobody tells it right. You're going to understand what they knew, why it terrified the most powerful religious institution on earth, and why I think it still unsettles people today. Not because it's evil, because it's personal. It asks you a harder question than do you believe. It asks, do you know? Stay with me. This gets strange and beautiful and a little unsettling. That's the point. And I promise you, once you hear how close this knowledge came to vanishing completely, you'll never look at official history the same way again. Most explanations get this wrong. They call Gnosticism a minor early Christian heresy, a footnote, a group that lost an argument long ago. That misses the point completely. The word gnosis is Greek for knowledge, but not the kind you memorize from a book. Gnosis meant direct, personal, felt understanding, knowledge you arrive at yourself, through insight, through awakening. The difference between someone describing fire to you and you actually touching it. You can believe something because someone told you to. That's faith, and I respect it. I think it holds people together in real ways, and I'm not here to tear that down. But the Gnostics wanted something else entirely. They wanted to know directly, without a priest standing between them and the truth, deciding how much of it they're allowed to have, deciding when they're ready and when they're not. And that idea, that you don't need permission to reach the divine, is exactly what made this dangerous. If you don't need a priest, you don't need a church. And if you don't need a church, you don't need the people running it, collecting from it, or controlling what gets said from its pulpit. I think that's precisely why this got buried. Not because it was false, because it was inconvenient to power. Ideas that make institutions unnecessary rarely survive the institutions they threaten. The Gnostics believed every human carries a fragment of the divine trapped inside them, and gnosis is the process of waking that fragment up, remembering something you already are, but forgot. Not learning something new, remembering something ancient. Hold on to that word. It's going to come back again and again, because everything else we're about to walk through builds on it. Let me take you somewhere. December 1945. Upper Egypt, near Nag Hammadi, close to the Nile. A farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Salman is digging for sabak, a natural fertilizer, near some limestone cliffs. His host strikes something hard, too even to be a rock. He digs around it, a large sealed clay jar, buried deep, untouched for over a millennium and a half. Here's the part that gets me every time. He almost doesn't open it. Local superstition warned of spirits sealed inside things like this. He considers smashing it and walking away, leaving it buried, leaving whatever might be inside it undisturbed forever. Curiosity wins. He breaks it open. Inside, 13 leather-bound books, papyrus pages covered in Coptic script, unread for 1500 years. Not fragments, not rumors. Whole intact books. And here's the detail almost nobody tells you. In the weeks after, before anyone understood what they'd found, some of these pages were burned. Used as kitchen fuel. Words that survived Roman persecution, survived monks hiding them in the desert to protect them from the church itself, nearly lost in the end to an ordinary cooking fire, because nobody in that household knew what they were looking at. That jar is the whole story, honestly. Buried, nearly destroyed, rediscovered by accident, hanging by a thread the entire way through. That's not just what happened to these books. That's what happened to this entire way of understanding the divine. History isn't really what happened. It's what survived. And what survived is often just what got lucky. What that farmer cracked open became the Nag Hammadi library. Over 50 ancient texts, including Gospels the church spent centuries trying to erase completely. Keep that jar in mind. We're coming back to it before this is over. To understand why this mattered, you need to know, in the 1st and 2nd centuries, there was no single Christianity. No agreed Bible, no settled doctrine. Just chaos. Dozens of communities across the Roman world, each with their own Gospels, their own version of who Jesus was and what he actually came to do. Some believed Jesus was a physical savior who died for sin. Others believed something radically different, that he was a messenger handing out secret knowledge about the true nature of reality, nothing to do with sin at all. One version eventually won, and the winners got to decide retroactively that everyone who disagreed had always been wrong. Much of what we know about Gnostic belief actually comes from Irenaeus of Lyon, a 2nd century bishop who wrote extensively attacking Gnostic teachings in a work called Against Heresies. Here's the twist I find almost funny in a dark way. He documented their beliefs in such detail to refute them that his writing became one of our main windows into understanding them at all. He tried to bury them with words, and instead preserved them for us to find 17 centuries later. You can attack an idea into detail, but detail is memory. Memory doesn't fully die. It just waits for someone to go looking again. Now the heart of it. Listen to this less like a lesson, more like a story told by candlelight 2,000 years ago, passed quietly from one believer to the next. In the beginning, there was no material universe, only the pleroma, meaning fullness. A realm of pure divine light, filled with beings called eons, emanations of the divine, each a ripple further from the source. The way sound fades the further it travels from where it started. One aeon was named Sophia, wisdom. She made a mistake, not out of evil but longing. She wanted to create and understand the divine source on her own, without a partner, without permission. Some versions say it came from love, some from curiosity. I think both are true, because I think love and curiosity are closer to the same impulse than we usually admit. That longing produced a flawed being, cut off from the fullness, unaware of the true source above him, the Demiurge. He believed himself the one true God, not out of malice, but ignorance. Blind to the reality above him, he created the physical universe. This world, the one you're sitting in right now watching this. One of the most influential teachers behind this system was Valentinus, a 2nd century thinker from Alexandria, so respected that, by some historical accounts, he came close to being elected Bishop of Rome. Sit with that alternate timeline for a moment, a version of history where this entire worldview didn't lose. Here's the part that matters to you personally. When Sophia fell and the Demiurge built this world, sparks of true divine light became trapped inside human beings. Inside flesh, inside bone and breath, and the noise of an ordinary Tuesday. That spark is you. You are, according to this teaching, divine light wearing a body, trapped in a system built by a lesser God who doesn't even know he's lesser. Gnosis was the process of waking that spark, remembering what you actually are beneath the forgetting that this world constantly, quietly reinforces. When I first understood this myth, it didn't feel like fantasy. It felt like something I've actually felt, that quiet sense some people carry their whole lives that they don't quite belong here, that something in them is bigger than their circumstances, bigger than their bad days, bigger than the version of themselves the world keeps handing back to them. I'm not saying it's literally true. I'm saying it's emotionally exact. That's why it survived 2,000 years underground. If the Demiurge built the prison, he didn't run it alone. Gnostic cosmology describes Archons, Greek for rulers, cosmic gatekeepers stationed throughout creation, whose function was to keep trapped divine sparks asleep, unaware, cycling through forgetting, life after life, never quite waking to what they actually are. One teacher, Basilides, active in Alexandria in the early 2nd century, described hundreds of layered heavens, each governed by its own ruling power, stacked between the material world and the true source above it, like locked doors inside locked doors. I want to be careful here, because it's easy to take this somewhere conspiratorial, and that's genuinely not what I think it's about. I don't believe the Gnostics were describing hidden governments or secret cabals. I think symbolically they were describing something almost everyone has felt at some point. The sense of structures around you, distractions, noise, habits, that quietly keep you from asking deeper questions. Systems that keep you comfortable enough, busy enough, tired enough, that you never stop to wonder what you actually are underneath it all. Gnosis, in this framework, wasn't just insight, it was resistance. The one thing the Archons couldn't take from you once you had it. Waking up wasn't just enlightenment. It was quiet rebellion against the entire structure built to keep you asleep, without you ever noticing you were sleeping. Remember that jar? This is where its contents finally come back into the story. Among the 50-some texts pulled from it were entire gospels the world had lost completely. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth. Sealed away for 16 centuries, waiting for someone to accidentally strike them with a hoe. The Gospel of Thomas is the most striking of all of them. No birth story, no crucifixion. Just over 100 sayings attributed to Jesus, riddle-like, meant to be sat with rather than simply read. One says the kingdom of God isn't coming later, somewhere else. It's already spread across the earth, and people simply don't see it. Read that again. Not a future reward. Something already here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for you to actually look. That's a completely different Jesus than the one most people grew up with. Not a sacrifice paying for sin. A teacher handing out riddles designed to wake people up. One of the boldest thinkers pushing this even further was Marcion of Sinope, a wealthy 2nd century shipowner turned theologian, who argued the God of the Old Testament and the God revealed through Jesus weren't even the same being. The church eventually declared him a heretic and cut his teachings from the record almost entirely. I'm not telling you any of this to argue that one version of Christianity is true and another false. That's not my place, and it's genuinely not the point. What strikes me is how many sincere, complete spiritual worlds existed side by side in those early centuries, before one version won. Not necessarily because it was truer, because it consolidated power more effectively. That should make you a little uneasy. It makes me uneasy. It means the spiritual history you inherited was shaped as much by politics as by revelation. Here's how you actually kill an idea. Not with an argument, with a council. Starting in the 4th century, church councils began deciding, once and for all, what counted as official scripture and what didn't. Texts that didn't fit the emerging orthodoxy were declared heretical. Copies were destroyed. Simply owning certain texts became dangerous. Monastic communities, most historians believe, buried texts like the Nag Hammadi library specifically to protect them from being burned, hiding them in the desert the way you'd hide something you loved from someone determined to destroy it. That detail matters more than people give it credit for. Someone somewhere cared enough about these ideas to risk everything just to bury them safely rather than watch them destroyed. That's not the behavior of people protecting nonsense. That's the behavior of people protecting something they genuinely believed was true. Here's my honest opinion, and I say this as someone who respects religious tradition, not someone trying to tear it down. What happened to the Gnostics is a warning that has nothing to do with religion specifically, and everything to do with power in general. Anytime one version of the truth wins completely, and every competing version gets silenced or burned, you should ask why. Not because the winning version is automatically wrong, but because certainty that arrives through force is different from certainty that arrives through honest persuasion, and history has a bad habit of confusing the two. The Gnostics didn't lose the argument. They lost the war. For over 1,000 years, we only knew about them through the words of the people who destroyed them. But ideas like this don't actually die. They just go quiet. Traces of Gnostic thought kept surfacing for centuries after the official suppression. In medieval mysticism, in Renaissance esoteric thought, later in the psychology of Carl Jung, who studied the Nag Hammadi texts closely and saw in them an early symbolic map of the human unconscious. The trapped divine spark, the forgetting, the waking up. Jung didn't see superstition in these old texts. He saw psychology centuries ahead of its time, wearing the language of myth because myth was the only language available back then. I think that's the real inheritance here. Not a religion to join. Not a doctrine to adopt. A question, handed down across 2,000 years, surviving fire and burial and erasure, arriving finally in your hands right now, today, watching this. Go back to that jar one more time. Buried. Nearly lost. Nearly burned as kindling by people who didn't know what they were holding. And then, by pure accident, uncovered. Its knowledge finally allowed to breathe again after 1,600 years of silence. I don't think that's just a story about ancient books. I think it's a description of what gnosis actually is. Something true, buried deep inside you, sitting quietly under all the noise of daily life, waiting, not to be taught to you, but to be remembered. So here's the only question I actually want to leave you with. Not what do you believe? That's the easy question. The real one is harder. What do you know?